qualified teachers, Sarah Beecher from Clare Galway, who is, she's working in Clare Galway. She's a newly qualified primary teacher. And Sinead Duggan, a newly qualified post-primary teacher from Ballincollig in Cork. We also have sitting on the platform Tomás O'Rourke, who well known to you all as Director of the Teaching Council. We have Michael Shevlin, Professor of Inclusive Education in Trinity College, and we have Dolores McDonough, who is a lecturer in St Angela's College in Sligo. So thank you all very much for coming. The format is this. We've asked each of them in advance, we've asked them 3 questions, and they're not obliged to answer every question. We don't force anybody here, but each of them have given some consideration to the question. So I'll just read you the question first, and then I'll invite members of panel to see if they have views on it. The first question we've asked them to respond to relates to Peter's research findings, which highlighted the issue of the importance of school placement. That is, sourcing placements, the diversity of placements, support for students in placement, and so on. So therefore, we asked them the question, how can school placements during the initial teacher education be better structured and supported in order to support and enhance inclusive understanding and practice from the perspective of the student teacher, the provider, and the school? So no better people to start with than the student teachers, or people who were recently student teachers. So maybe I might go to you first, Sarah, and yes, yourself.
Where I was looking at, first of all, was, I suppose, we had our first school placement after Christmas, well, before Christmas actually, in first year, but we hadn't actually received any guidance, I suppose, as regards SEN in that particular time. So our placement would have come first, and then our experience of the SEN modules would have become second to that. So looking back on it, I probably would have preferred maybe to have the SEN module at the same time as the placement, so that we could really apply it to the school that we were in at the time, and to obviously the children in our care. And as regards that then as well, there was huge variation, I suppose, in our school placements. If we were, as I was, in a rural setting, it would have been very much a different experience to the peers that would have had an urban school to go to. I suppose I didn't witness an awful lot of SEN until maybe my probationary year last year. And that again, it wasn't the part of the college, I suppose. It would have been very much based on the schools that were available to us. And it's interesting looking at this morning's findings that 60% of, I suppose, 60% of my cohort would only have experienced children with SEN, but there's so much SEN in schools at the moment. So maybe catering that a bit better and timetabling in the school placement in accordance with the modules in SEN. And looking at Marlene, she said about building a wider network of school partnerships. I suppose I'm very much open to specialising in SEN, and I did complete a specialism in SEN, but would have loved a practical side of it as well. We did a lot of theory and couldn't have been better prepared for, I suppose, our year as a newly qualified teacher, but I would have loved to have a placement to apply that.
Thank you. And Sinead, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, just to give you a background, I did my final year, my one placement block was done in my final year of my undergraduate, so I had 2 weeks in my second year, 2 weeks in my third year, and then a full year in my last year of my undergraduate, so slightly different to Sarah's. But I just found, talking with my peers and myself, the limitations of sourcing placement and diversities of placement was a huge problem, and the main limitations I found was finances and convenience for student teachers. Travelling to placements was a huge financial burden on some people, and the connections that some people had in the school already helped people to get diversity of placements. And then lastly, as post-primary, the subjects that the schools wanted us to teach determined what placements we would get. So maybe setting a placement for each student. So in second and third year we were set placements, and I found the diversity in our 2 weeks in second year and third year was much more diverse than our full year in the last year of our undergraduate, because we were set the placement. So maybe setting the placement for the final year may help, and maybe setting up a system that if you are going to a school that maybe you can't access with a car or bus, that maybe carpooling or a system that you kind of buddy up and go together, so that you do get diversity without having a financial burden. The other thing was on us to understand the benefits of having diversity in our school placement. So for some people, you're focused on the grade and you're focused on what result you're going to get at the end of your initial teacher training, and that is important, but it's also important to be practical and understand that there is diversity in all schools, and that it will be beneficial in your initial teacher training to have that diversity. So when sourcing the placement, that student teachers would shift the attitude of what school will get me the best result as an initial teacher training, but what school will help me develop my career further and having more diverse placement.
Okay, thank you, Sinead. Now we might jump to our teacher educators. Maybe start with Dolores first.
Well, I suppose from the perspective of St Angela's College, we operate a concurrent degree. We're the sole provider of home economics teacher education. And over the 4-year programme, students get the opportunity to, in first year, their teaching practice is organised from within house, but in second, third and fourth year, they self-select their placements. I suppose just with regard to our previous two speakers, in relation to the 4th year placement, there is a specialist placement setting. And I suppose it's interesting from a college perspective. A number of colleagues and myself would have engaged in a research project looking at the reconceptualising of school placement as part of initial teacher education, both North and South. So we looked at that with colleagues in the University of Ulster. And we looked, I suppose, specifically at investigating attitudes and perceptions of undergraduate students, student teachers, in terms of inclusion and their perceptions in terms of competence. And it was interesting with the 4th year cohort, we carried this out about 3 years ago, and with the 4th year cohort, they very much felt going on the specialist placement that their attitudes to inclusion were very positive, similar to what Peter recorded. Many of them felt that they didn't maybe necessarily have the knowledge and understanding. However, post-placement, they waxed lyrical about how much they had to bring to the actual placement in terms of their skill set, etc. So I think it was when they were on the ground practicing and putting, if you like, the theory into practice, they realised, how much they had actually to give in the different contexts. I suppose in relation to the specialist placement, they get the opportunity to engage in a special school placement, or also they get the opportunity to perhaps be in a special class attached to a mainstream setting. And I know there has been a good bit of debate here already this morning in terms of the segregation, integration, inclusion piece. But I suppose we would very much feel that the special school has a huge resource to our undergraduate students. And again, I suppose they begin to question inclusion, not solely from an academic perspective, but social inclusion. And that was something that very much came back in the research that we did. I suppose based on the homework that we were given and looking at how ITE can be better structured and supported, I think it's a common theme that has come from this morning's presentations, is the need for collaboration between ITE providers and schools. And I think that is that reciprocal relationship is hugely important. As ITE providers, we are very much I suppose, respectful of the partnership arrangements that we have with our schools. And by the same token, we would get very positive feedback from principals and cooperating teachers of the level of skill set that our undergraduate students bring to the experience. I just want to pick up on something Sinead mentioned there in terms of grading and assessment. And as ITE providers, we have to be very cognizant that, of course, assessment is a key component of all of this. And as an undergraduate student, you're very much driven by, particularly when you're self-selecting your placement, what will yield me the best possible outcome. I suppose back in the college I have a number of hats, but one of them is to provide input to our undergrads in terms of interview preparation. And I suppose from that perspective, I would be very much advocating the need to be flexible, the need to be accessible, to be innovative, and I suppose given the specialist placement, I think that that's crucially important. And just picking up on the first speaker's point, within our own structure in the college, we always input, albeit in an infused model, on SEN prior to micro-teaching first and foremost, which we have in the college, but also prior to specialist school placement. And before any of the school placements, there is an input in relation to special educational needs, which I think is hugely important, because I suppose we're talking about the mainstream experiences that most of our undergraduate students have coming into teaching placement. So,
Thank you.
I'll stop at this
Thank
point
you very
in time
much.
and let other people speak.
Michael,
just to follow up on what Dolores is saying, I suppose when you think about the overall concept, I think we've been maybe mistakenly believing that somehow if you train initial teachers so well, they're going to somehow transform a situation out there in schools, and I think that's not realistic. I think it's a journey, as Peter has been saying, and I think there's lots of components to that journey. Our relationship with schools, you try and develop school partnerships, but schools have the ultimate say over how those relationships can be developed. And I think we need a lot more discussion with schools about what is the optimal way of working with our student teachers, and how do we ensure that that's a very positive experience for everybody that's involved. Okay. And I think also then in terms of this is common, and I've been working in this area a long time with student teachers, is this whole thing about how do you get the balance between theory and practice. And I think it's a really difficult balance to achieve, but I think you've got to build in opportunities for students to actually practice what you're talking about or what you're encouraging. So if you're doing work around differentiation, they have to be able to practice that and come back, I think, as was suggested in Peter's research, that they can have an opportunity to discuss that in workshops, but also through assessments. You can ask the students very clearly to get to know the special education team in the school, to actually observe, practice, what is it like, what was small group, one-to-one, in-class support, what does that look like, what does it feel like? And I think these are ways in which you can develop that, not just the awareness, but also picking up some of the practical skills, but also, I suppose, the theoretical foundation or the principle foundation, which is we're there to teach all children.
Tomas, and just be sure to speak into the mic. Thank you.
Thanks.
You're the teaching council, so you have an overview of all of these things.
Thanks, Sheila. So from a teaching council perspective, I think the points I'm going to make, about 2 or 3, are probably based or grounded in the belief that teaching is the most important profession in society, because every other profession depends on good teaching to produce its future members. And we all spend, I understand from previous reading, about 14,000 hours being taught by teachers. So if we take that as a starting position, maybe not all people would, but if we do, that has serious implications for us with the level of funding and support for school placement in particular, I think, within teacher education. So we're talking about structure and support. What we hear from principals and teachers in schools in our engagement for the last number of years is that they say it's not necessarily about remuneration or pay. Some say that, but not many. But they say, look, we're providing the support to teacher educators to teach the teachers of the future. We want some real reciprocal partnership with the HEIs. And in fairness to the HEIs, there are some examples of that out there, but we're hearing these calls for that to be enhanced and developed further. I think at a very practical level, where we have 2 systems, IT systems, that are in place to manage and administer school placement, to make it easier. Because another thing that principals have said to us is that in post-primary in particular, some schools might deal with 11 different HEIs, 11 different sets of guidelines, timetables, criteria, and so forth. And they say, we want to take students on placement, but please make it easier for us. So you have the MESA system, as I understand it, in the DCU Institute, and you have the TOOS system in UL and Mary I. And I would like to see, certainly, I think, more HEIs buy into those systems and use them to make the process easier for themselves as HEIs and for schools as well. That does carry a financial cost, and that has to be acknowledged. But coming back to my opening point, that funding must be found then to buy into those systems. Equally, to give a balanced response, I think we have heard anecdotal evidence of some schools, for example, only taking past students on school placement, only taking certain numbers. The Chair of Education Committee, Declan Kelleher, in the Council, has stated in public on at least one occasion that every teacher has an intergenerational obligation to take student teachers on school placement. Because like myself, I was a student teacher at one time. We've all been beneficiaries of that support in the past. And it's very much, I think, consistent and resonant with the focus in Threadhead on mentoring, that kind of giving back to newly qualified teachers, perhaps the very supports we did not have when we were going through teacher education in decades previous. So I think if we look at the practices and cultures around school placement on the school side on the one hand, and taking student teachers and seeing them as an asset, I think Peter referred to in his presentation, the full diversity of student teachers. But equally on the other side, practical supports that are there, that have been set up through state funding, namely TUS and METIS, and can we make better use of more and leverage them across the system? They're low-hanging fruit that we can certainly make good use of in the near future, I would think.
Thank you, Tomas. Now, the next question I'll turn to, and I'll ask each member of the panel to be reasonably brief because we must keep an eye on the time as well. But it's an important question. The research turned out the idea that teacher educators have CPD needs. So how can these be enhanced and what are the challenges? Maybe I might start with you, Michael, this time.
I think that's a very difficult one because I think I'm coming probably from a post-primary background and we're very subject-based, and I think there's real issues there around would it be prioritised, would it be seen as a priority, because you have so many other demands in terms of literacy, numeracy and so many others. But I think, I know Peter mentioned some of the idea of permeation, and I know that was very strong in the United Kingdom maybe about 15 years ago, and there were some issues around that as well. But I think on a local level, we run a lot of research seminars, and people get an opportunity to discuss what is current research. Also, a lot of our students, our doctoral students, master students, are doing very, very cutting-edge kind of work that is really based in classrooms and in schools. And I think this raises a level of awareness among other teacher educators about the importance of this. And quite a number already buy into this, and we would work together on different programs. So I think that kind of support at a local level can be really helpful.
Okay, thanks very much, Michael. Dolores, do you want to add anything there?
I saw this question first. Thanks, Michael. It brought up the idea of, I suppose, role identity and professional identity and what constitutes teacher educators. So I suppose we've teacher educators within the initial teacher education piece as initial teacher education providers, but we also have our school-based teacher educators. So I suppose it's CPD across the whole spectrum. I mean, if we're to look at the European Commission in their report in 2013, they define teacher educators as all those who are actively facilitating the learning of student teachers and teachers. So it's along that continuum of initial teacher education and CPD. And I suppose, we all have an onus to have inquiry-based reading and reflection in terms of our own practice within our institutions and also as a teaching fraternity. Ongoing research is key to this, and Michael has alluded to that. And I suppose the key piece here is that research is done, but it's where to disseminate that research, that people have and are actively listening to what is happening and how that can then impact on teaching back at base. So I think it's a complex situation. I know I'm involved in CPD in terms of SEN for teachers who are in a specialist piece, and maybe I'll get an opportunity to speak about that in a few moments. But I think there is need for ongoing CPD pieces. I also think that there is need for certification and accreditation for what teachers engage in, be they cooperating teachers or mentors of our initial teacher, of our student teachers. So I think there's a space there for more dialogue between the varying stakeholders.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, I don't know whether this was something you thought about, but I'm sure your students have some ideas about it, or recent teachers. Maybe Sarah to start?
Yeah. So I suppose my experience of CPD, it would have definitely begun in the ITE and Mary Immaculate College in Limerick. I suppose that was the foundation for CPD for me, where we would have experienced tutorials and workshops and case studies, and even on our own extended placement, we would have been placed in a special educational setting. Thank you. And as well as that then, since qualifying, since graduating, I have subsequently engaged in CPD during the summer and also throughout the year. Last year in particular, I engaged with a course with Middletown during the year, and I just felt it was more beneficial than the summer courses in many respects, simply because I was going into school the next day and I was applying it to children in my care, and it was very, very practical. And that's the whole purpose of CPD. You have to make sure that it is trial and error, that you're trying with it. You're trying best, I suppose, to deal with what's in your class and applying to that your knowledge and expertise in the area of CPD. But then again, you have to reflect on it, and without the reflection purpose, I suppose it's nearly invalid. And again, the NQT workshops themselves, as part of the induction element of my probation last year, we would have gone to a lot of those. And it's unfortunate in many respects that there was only one of those workshops based on SEN and inclusion. It would have been great to see maybe a few more, and I think they would have been a far more beneficial thing to have availed of, as opposed to just the regular workshops that were in place, unfortunately.
Thank you very much. And Sinead?
So I suppose when I thought about CPD...
maybe a little closer, Sinead, than that. Yeah.
So when I thought about CPD, I suppose I wouldn't know a lot about teacher education, CPD, but CPD for teachers, I instantly thought of the Trihid scheme, which I'm going through at the moment, and it's a great example that I think we could all take on, whether we're teacher educators or teachers. Just creating the professional community and having an open discussion. And as Tomas said earlier, we're not lone rangers. We have to communicate with each other, and we have to discuss things that are happening in our classroom and give each other examples so that we can learn from each other, whether it be team teaching, teacher observation. At the moment, there's teachers coming into my class to observe me, and I'm going to a teacher's class, and the discussion is afterwards is so rich and so full of learning that I think every teacher would benefit from it, not just teachers that are on the Droichead scheme, are not just teachers, but teacher educators would benefit. It also helps to share resources, whether it be online or team drives. In the school I'm in at the moment, we have open team drives that we upload things all the time, and I learned so much from that, and I can use that in my classroom, and I can put up things that I've done in college to help maybe experienced teachers with new things, new developments. But I think overall it just has to be an open mind, forward thinking by all teachers, teacher education, educators and schools and school principals to have this system in place in every school.
Thank you, Sinead. And Tomas, I know that you've been giving a lot of consideration in the Council to CPD, mainly focusing on teachers, but have you been thinking about teacher educators as well?
Yes, we have. Number one, everything Sinead said. I would echo that 100%. Yes, we have. I mean, we hosted the EU Presidency Conference on Teacher Educators back in 2013 on behalf of the state. And echoing Dolores' comments and some of the other comments, I think Marlene's as well, that one key point that struck me personally, professionally from that conference was this kind of wider understanding of who are teacher educators. What I've coined before is the Pheasant Plucker Conundrum. So we're all very familiar with, I'm not a pheasant plucker, I'm a pheasant plucker. So on the money plucking pheasants, the pheasant plucker comes. So when we look at the area of teachers, I think Sinead referred to this, the cooperating teachers, the mentor teachers, they're teacher educators too. They need to step forward and own the space a bit. And I think taking the pheasant plucker thing into that space is that they might say, I'm not a teacher educator, I'm just a teacher of teachers. and I'm only teaching teachers until the teacher educator comes. That's not sustainable, and that doesn't reflect the rich diversity of practice that Sinead and Sarah both described here, and Dolores and Michael in their turn. So I think that's why I really echo what Sinead said. I think in terms of the structure, what's needed and the challenges to that, I mean, I think Joe Travers and Peter both referred to this idea of space and time that teacher educators are entitled to and need to get their heads around what they're trying to convey. I was very struck in Peter's presentation, that gap between the values on one hand and the skills on the other, and the confidence in terms of that we say it's really, really important, but me? Is it going to be me, teacher educator or teacher? And we need to get behind that a bit more. I think that space and time piece is, the challenge to it is, I think, the current system of incentivization, as I understand it in third level, both more broadly and in research, this idea that universities are very focused on climbing rankings, and that's linked back to your citation exercise. I think if teaching is the most important profession in society, school placement and time for all teacher educators to really get their heads around that has to be valued too. Not necessarily measured or costed or whatever, but it has to be really valued for its own sake, because every cent that the state invests in school placement has a three-way payoff. Teacher educator, cooperating teacher, and student teacher. And therefore, on the research point, and I'll close on this, I think that widening the understanding of what research is really important. Because I think in the medical field, Atul Gawande has spoken about this, and Ben Goldacre in education, that we don't invest half as much time as we should in leveraging insights from existing research as we do in conducting new research. So we need to and that's why our CRE research series is such an important departure for us in the council, to really link teacher educators in the wider sense of the word across the spectrum, to really leverage what research is telling us about good professional practice.
Okay, thanks, Mose. Now, we just have about 5 minutes before we open the discussion to the floor. So I'm going to ask you, each of you, to consider the question around the school, the role of the school and the training and role of mentor teachers and their support. So if you can be, in maybe 1 minute each, able to give us your views on that. And maybe I'll start this time with you, Tomas, since you mentioned schools as key areas.
Yeah, I suppose, being brief, I am really impressed by the calibre of a new qualified teacher that I'm sharing the panel with today, and I think it's an honour and privilege for me to share the panel with the newly qualified teachers. And there's a Justin McGuire, I think, here at the conference, who was tweeted out, and we've put on top of our profile in the Teaching Council. He said, "We are all learners in this process of improving inclusive practice." And I think the future looks bright in this space in terms of what's happening in schools with newly qualified teachers. The level of insight they are bringing, and professional vulnerability as well at the same time, I think augurs really, really well for what we're trying to do within schools. And as Sinead pointed out, the RID itself and our ESRI research bears this out, is transforming whole school cultures. It's a process ostensibly about the NQT, but the whole school culture around conversation with teaching and learning is being transformed before our very eyes.
Thank you, Tomas. Sinead?
So just something, when I was introduced to this topic, the first thing I thought was, again, what was mentioned earlier, the gap between the practical and the theory. And when I was a student teacher, I said this to someone last night. I had one class, probably 2 classes per day. All my attention was focused on them. I knew everything about them. And then I went into an 18-hour contract where I'm teaching 7 classes a day, and I'm photocopying and I'm taking on extracurricular, and I've less attention on the classes. So I think what the school can do and the mentor teachers can do to help us to move from being in an IT into NQTs is that to let us observe the day-to-day running of the school and not just individual classes. So following a teacher's day-to-day, challenges. For example, maintaining a balance between inclusive education and academic pressure. This is my first year teaching state exam years, and inclusive education, that's the biggest struggle, trying to bring students' attention away from the academic pressure and their concentration on the state exam, and bring them back to learning and what it means to learn. How to read and apply IEPs in your classroom, how to continue inclusive education if you job share sub, or if you're out in extracurricular. So if someone's going into my classroom and I'm out at a match, are they putting in the same practice as I am? Learning how to act on discretion when it comes to discipline, how to look to students for feedback on reflection on your own teaching methods, and preparation on how to communicate with parents and SNAs about particular students. So these are the practical things that as an NQT are my biggest challenges that maybe I wouldn't have been introduced to as in my ITEs. So that would be something that the school could help us with.
Okay, thanks for that. Gráinne. Sorry, Sarah.
Just to reiterate what Sinead has said, as well as all that, I suppose our biggest issue in coming into schools, and Marlene would have touched on it as well, is our confidence, I suppose. Am I really capable of, I suppose, educating these children and facilitating all of their needs, especially when you've got such a large group that could be presented in front of you. And I think what schools are doing, and I think that they are aware of, is their huge role in collaboration with you and discussing what is going on in your classroom as regards your planning, your timetabling. Are you assessing the needs of the children in your care? Are you catering for those needs? And I think even above that is the respect that they have for newly qualified teachers and the mutual respect. I suppose we would obviously have to respect that they're far more experienced than us in many respects. But again, we have to acknowledge that we're coming out with, I suppose, a fresh eye for things. And that mutual respect is very, very important in making sure that the needs of the children in your care are being met.
Thank you. Thank you. Michael, the role of the school?
Okay. I think it was mentioned earlier this morning about the critical role of school leaders, and I think this is really fundamental to affecting change. And I think it's very much about how school leaders think inclusively. And I know in some research we came across a couple of primary schools where the idea of the principal was that every single teacher at some stage would be an SEN teacher, and that this was rotated. And we did research where we actually talked to some of the teachers who had gone back into their classrooms, and they said how much they had benefited from actually having that exposure and that understanding and in-depth challenge and everything else that was coming there. And I think that's a model that certainly could be looked at, while you keep some anchored people obviously there. The other thing that just struck me is that in Ireland we're very, very good at informal networks. We've got lots of support. We know who to ring, we know who to talk to, and that's fine for those of us that are in the know and are around a while, as I obviously have been. But I came across in Scotland a really good idea around where you would have a network, and again I think Marlene was talking about this morning, where you could put your teacher educators, your school leaders, other people involved in resource, ordinary classroom teachers and newly qualified and student teachers. And I mean, it's a great model which maybe meets 3 or 4 times a year, doesn't cost an enormous amount of money. It's more about maybe setting it up under a particular umbrella that could work, you know.
Thanks, Michael. And Dolores?
Yeah, and I suppose just to pick up on, I think it was Sinead, you mentioned it there in terms of the work shadowing. That would be something as well that came from our piece of research, that student teachers would have felt the need to engage in more work shadowing opportunities while on work placement. So I certainly would concur with that. I suppose again going back to the reciprocal relationships between schools and Ite providers, I think, you know, it's very important, as Michael said, to have school leaders. It's also very important that the work shadowing that our student teachers engage in, that they are work shadowing the best possible practice. So to that end, it's hugely important that there's ongoing CPD, that the teaching fraternity are involved in ongoing upskilling. And I suppose to that end, I'd just like to acknowledge the department's involvement in terms of funding so many programs nationally, in terms, you know, our postgraduate diploma in special educational needs that's offered in 6 colleges nationally. I think that's a huge commitment, and I think that aligns itself to, I think it was task 5 of Marlene's presentation, that need for teachers who are in a specialist role within their schools, that they are educated in terms of inclusion to the best possible level. So I think that commitment needs to be acknowledged here this morning in relation to ongoing CPD, which is vital for teachers to take that lead role and be good role models for at school level for our newly qualified teachers.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.